So I would love to introduce you to Mike Pondsmith, who is the original creator of Cyberpunk Tabletop RPG, and without whom indeed there would be no Cyberpunk 2077.
If you're talking about the genre overall, I think it is more popular than it was. It used to be very niche when we started out. I think part of that is the genre's matured. I think also, particularly like what CD Projekt and Tal did together, we sort of redefined what Cyberpunk was like. It wasn't always Blade Runner, although I love Blade Runner. Basically, what I think has happened is people are able to actually make this work in their heads because it's not so far off and so strange that, they can't relate to it. That was a problem way back in the 80s because that was the time when things were very positive and people just couldn't even imagine the things that, went down in a cyberpunk world. Here's the deal. Blade Runner is my favorite movie. I love Blade Runner. I have all the copies and types. And in fact, what happened was at the time I went to see Blade Runner with my girlfriend at the time. As I said to her, I either hate this movie or love this movie, and I can't decide which. And then I went back again. That was the start. At some point, I was doing Mechton, which is our giant robot game. And a friend of mine was running a game of Mechton. He had one of his players, a gentleman named Walter John Williams, who wrote a book called Hardwire, which is one of the, I'd say about maybe the second or third seminal cyberpunk novel out there. I loved what Walter did. It was fun because usually, cyberpunk is very, very grim. And what Walter did was he kind of crossed it with this kind of Old West cowboy-like feeling to it. He said, this is really good. I've got to do something like this. I'll kind of make it a little like Blade Runner in terms of some of the technology, but Blade Runner doesn't have the kinds of technology we would have in cyberpunk. Blade Runner doesn't have guys with hands that are made of metal. So I fused the two together. And I remember talking to a friend of mine at the time, a gentleman by the name of Larry DiTilio, who's a screenwriter. I remember telling him about the prototypes and what we wanted to do. And he said, you're never going to be able to get a party together to actually do this. They're all going to kill each other. And I went, yeah, you're right. Oh, okay, how do we do this? And I said, okay, cyberpunk should be about a dark future where you all are basically part of a heist group that does jobs. And that was the foundation for how to play it. It made it a playable situation, and Walter's novels had similar elements, so it was easy for me to steal from Walter, which was fun because later on, we're friends, and he actually wrote some stuff based on his Hardwire series for us. That was kind of how we got started, and I remember somebody else saying at one point, like, well, how are you going to get people into this? And I said, it's an absolute power fantasy. You're all wired up with all this gear, and you've got huge guns. You don't feel guilty because it's an evil corporation you're taking down, and you're in there working with your friends, which is important.